On the night of April 14, 1912, Titanic received ice warnings. One of them even pointed to the exact area she would cross just hours later. On the wireless sets of the era, safety alerts shared the line with private messages, and the top priority was not always protection. If you want to understand how a correct warning can get treated like a footnote, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's reconstruct the forgotten alert that could have changed that night. By late April 14, 1912, everything on board seems to run like clockwork. In the lounges and corridors, service continues, and the engines become a steady hum behind everyday life. Below, boilers and turbines keep the ship moving fast, with no obvious sign of trouble for anyone above. Up high, the lookouts stare into the darkness, trying to separate shapes from the horizon. With the ocean so calm, there is almost no foam, no breaking waves, nothing to outline ice from a distance. That mix of comfort inside and silence outside creates the perfect setup for danger to exist without being felt. While most passengers turn in for the night, the wireless room stays alive. In 1912, Marconi wireless traffic serves both operations and private telegrams, and the flow can be relentless. Forms stack up, logs get filled in, and messages go to the bridge when needed. The radio is not yet treated as a continuous safety system, but as a useful service, not the ship's center of gravity. That shapes the tempo. Read, copy, pass it along, then move on to the next signal. Outside, the liner keeps going, lit up and imposing, the ocean reflecting her lights like a dark mirror. Ice warnings arrive from other ships throughout the day and keep coming into the night. Some include coordinates. Others describe broad ice fields in the region. All of them depend on being read, logged, and forwarded correctly. On the bridge, this information can be compared to the chart and folded into routine navigation. But logged is not the same as acted on in real time. Once an alert slips into a stack of paper, urgency can fade before it ever becomes a decision. And on a crossing like this, small delays compound. On the bridge, night navigation follows the old disciplines: heading, instruments, checks, and constant watch. Outside the windows, there is only night, stars, and a horizon line that barely exists. In glassy water, ice is harder to spot because the surface does not break against obstacles and throw off obvious clues. Still, the order of the watch keeps the feeling of control intact. Speed and the navigation plan remain almost unchanged. The calm reinforces the belief that this stretch can be managed. The flow of communication does not slow down. It shifts, and it strains the system. Private messages compete with technical reports in the same stream, and priority can change depending on the moment and the workload. The result is real buildup: slips, papers, and logs moving too fast to become immediate action. On the bridge, the course stays steady and the instruments show nothing unusual. For anyone moving through the ship, everything still feels normal. Outside, the hull cuts forward with 4 funnels against the night. No visible sign of what is waiting ahead. Somewhere in that chain, a more specific ice warning arrives. Ice directly in the ship's path. It is written down, folded, delivered, read, and still it does not trigger a clear, immediate change. Instead of becoming a firm order to slow dramatically or alter course, it slips into the usual machine of logging and comparison. This is not a simple, oops, we forgot. It is a symptom of operational priority. When safety is not the radio's first filter, a warning can reach decision makers already weakened. And all the while, the ship keeps moving. Confidence grows when nothing seems wrong. The crew's experience, the smooth sea, and the flawless rhythm of the engines all reinforce the idea that risk is somewhere far away. Below, heavy work continues to sustain speed. Above, eyes search for signs the night itself refuses to reveal. Small measures help, like cutting glare on the bridge, but they do not solve the core problem. Limited visibility in a sea without waves. Routine holds. Danger can close in without making a sound. This is how a technical situation becomes a fragile one. As the hours pass, navigation stays grounded in instruments, charts, and direct observation. Any increase in caution remains subtle, because there is still no sense of open emergency. The calm water keeps the surface dark and uniform, draining contrast and hiding clues. Deep inside, the machinery keeps the same tempo, turning coal into continuous motion. Up top, the watch continues, but it depends on human eyes in low light. The scale of the liner clashes with the silence of the sea. In the final hours before the decisive moment, the system shows its weakness. Too many signals, too little hierarchy of urgency. The wireless keeps sending and receiving. Corridors keep carrying messages. The bridge keeps organizing the watch. Above, the lookout never stops scanning, but perception is limited by darkness, cold, and the absence of waves. Below, engineers hold the ship to her expected output, with no obvious reason to ease off. Up to this point, the risk is known, but treated as part of the route, and that sets the stage for a surprise that should not have been a surprise. The story tightens around a chain of small, cumulative choices. A warning is checked against the route, measured, filed, and the ship keeps going. The problem is not a lack of information. It is the priority that information receives inside the system. The bridge studies the black water. The wireless keeps operating as a mixed service. Speed stays high for the area. This is exactly how a correct alert becomes nothing more than administrative noise. If you want to follow how those details stack up until the point of no return, like the video and subscribe to the channel. The night is clear, but that does not mean visibility is easy. With calm water, there is almost no foam to outline ice at a distance, and the horizon becomes a dark, unreliable boundary. On the bridge, the watch stays disciplined, rotating between instruments, charts, and the view ahead. Up high, the lookout works in constant cold, sweeping the same field again and again. The overall feeling is still normal, controlled, backed by procedure and experience. But in night navigation, normal can simply mean there is no visible evidence yet. In a matter of seconds, a faint shape ahead stops being a question and becomes operational urgency. The warning comes from the lookout, and the bridge reacts fast. Confirm, maneuver, adjust. In water, this smooth ice can appear as a pale stain, and it can appear too late for a comfortable correction. The ship answers the helm, but the distance is already razor thin, and every second shrinks the options. What is looming ahead is not a small obstacle. It is a mass big enough to demand an evasive move at the limit, and even a well-executed maneuver may not be enough when time runs out. The impact does not come as a head-on collision. It comes as a long, grinding sideswipe. For many on board, the first sensation is a shudder and a muffled scrape, as if something dragged along the hull. On the bridge, the ice slides tight against the starboard side, and the sound of stressed metal confirms contact. But the real effect reveals itself below, a sequence of openings along the side that allows water to pour in without stopping. Not one point of damage, a line of damage compromising multiple compartments. In minutes, a subtle moment on deck becomes a structural crisis inside. The immediate response is technical: locate, measure, isolate. Teams go down to assess the flooding while watertight doors are triggered to hold the water back. Lantern beams hunt for the entry lines, and the rising level begins to expose how serious this is. On the bridge, decisions now depend on reports coming up from below. At the same time, on the boat deck, lifeboat preparation begins as a precaution. Routine shifts from observation to execution. The ship enters a phase where every minute changes the margin of control. Confirmation comes when different signals point to the same conclusion. The bow is losing buoyancy. Flooding advances and the weight of the water changes the balance, making the tilt noticeable to anyone walking, gripping rails, feeling the deck underfoot. The crew expands mobilization, handing out life jackets and directing people upward. Hesitation is common while the ship still looks stable, but the technical reality has already flipped. Preparation stops being a plan and becomes continuous practice. Time still exists, but now it has a price. On the boat deck, the work becomes a chain of short, critical tasks. Release the gripes, check the falls, organize positions, prepare the lowering. Gear is brought up, ropes are inspected, and passenger movement increases through corridors and stairways. The operation must be fast and controlled because any mechanical snag or coordination error costs minutes. At the same time, outside, the ship still looks enormous, almost unreal, yet the bow is visibly lower. The gap between grandeur and safety starts to show. The wireless changes function for good, from mixed service to survival tool. Operators send distress calls again and again, log replies, and feed the bridge with range estimates and possible responses. Every transmission is an attempt to shrink the ship's isolation out there. The work is constant, technical, exhausting, because it depends on repetition and a clean signal. Meanwhile, on deck, lifeboat prep accelerates. Communication is active, but help is not immediate, and the clock becomes a central operational factor. Evacuation takes shape with the hardest piece of any emergency: human movement through tight spaces. Stewards and stewardesses distribute life jackets, tighten straps, and funnel groups toward the upper exits. The ship is still lit up and looks intact, and that fuels disbelief for some passengers. Still, physical signs stack up: the tilt, a changed vibration, the crew's controlled urgency, the shift in routine. The flow pushes upward through the decks. Order depends on discipline and repeated procedure. The danger becomes visible not through an announcement, but through logistics in motion. The next phase is turning preparation into real departure. Lifeboats begin to lower, and the work demands control of weight, falls, and speed to avoid swinging hard against the hull. Passengers step in carefully, gripping gunnels and lines, trying to keep balance in the freezing air. The bow-down angle is still moderate, but enough to change how stable the ship feels and how people move. From sea level, the picture is stark. A brightly lit ship, 4 funnels, calm water, and small boats dropping into blackness. The contrast is brutal, and time only moves one way. The situation stops being damage control and becomes a race against volume. Water keeps advancing through the lower decks, driven by multiple openings along the hull, not a single isolated breach. Teams try practical barriers, start pumps, seal watertight doors, but the gap between inflow and capacity grows.
Straight up this corridor to the stairs, gentlemen. Keep moving along, please. There is plenty of time.
The bow-down angle becomes undeniable and reshapes internal routes, stairways, even how doors behave. On the upper decks, evacuation becomes absolute priority. The ship's geometry is changing, and with it, what is possible changes minute by minute. While the wireless room keeps hammering out distress signals, the bridge searches the darkness for any sign of an answer. On the boat deck, the operation becomes disciplined repetition. Check lines, release, correct quick failures, lower another boat. With every lifeboat that touches the water, the distance grows between those who leave and those who remain. From the surface, the scale becomes undeniable. A massive hull, 4 funnels in silhouette, and small craft pulling away in near silence. But the bow keeps sinking and the window to work keeps shrinking. With fewer options left, the final usable boats and last-ditch launches come into play. The deck is steeper now, and movement requires constant grip on rails and structures. The bridge keeps operating in the night, but it is working against a hard physical limit. Buoyancy is being lost from the front. Crews push, release, reposition, and fight to get every usable boat into the sea. Distress rockets climb into the black sky, lighting the scene for seconds at a time and exposing the urgency. Procedure is now battling gravity. Stress stops being only hydraulic and becomes structural. Below, water pressures corridors and compartments. Above, the ship answers with groans and vibrations that change in intensity. The liner is being bent by her own weight, the bow growing heavier, the rest of the hull trying to resist. Work on deck becomes harder because the angle changes everything: footing, lines, equipment, stability. Any sense of safety vanishes, replaced by constant adaptation. Outside, you can see a long, illuminated body, clearly struggling against physics. When the tilt reaches a critical point, the structure hits its limit. What began as a side scrape now reveals its full consequence. Compartments flooded, the bow dragging down, the hull straining through the midsection. From here, no procedure can reverse the motion. At best, it can reduce loss. The break happens, and the separation changes everything. The bow goes first, pulled under by the water it has taken on. The stern rises exposed and unstable before beginning its own descent. The ship stops being one system and becomes two bodies obeying the same law of the sea. With the bow gone, the stern hangs for a moment, raised and unstable, like a structure held up by borrowed time. People and crew try to hold on to what is left of deck, but the angle makes every move unpredictable. Inside, water and air rearrange with force, and metal sounds signal a progressive loss of integrity. From the sea, the stern looks enormous, with hull details in the underside visible above the waterline. Then it loses what little buoyancy remains and sinks until it disappears completely. What remains is churned water, debris, and a silence that feels impossible for something that big. After the sinking, the scene becomes small boats and vast distance. Lifeboats move through debris trying to hold direction in freezing water, wind cutting through stiff hands and soaked clothing. In some cases, there are controlled attempts to turn back and pull people from the water, but exposure limits how long anyone can act. Slowly, a faint glow on the horizon suggests help approaching, as night gives way to a pale dawn. What stays on the surface are material traces, wood, life jackets, scattered objects, and the central lesson circles back to the start. It was not a lack of warning, but the way information was prioritized that helped shape the outcome of that night.
This video was an AI-assisted historical simulation